Hello everybody and welcome back. Good to talk to all of you again today. And today I've got a replay for all of you. Another one. Yes, I know yesterday I did one too, but another one today. This one's from IJN Kako on the European server, playing Taiho on North. I know it's not the North map, it's North, but winter, but still North. And yeah, I mean, it's a CV replay, and normally I'm not a huge fan of doing CV replays just because the replay system is very wonky. As you can tell, even when Kako is sort of like just panning around, you can sort of tell that the replay camera is not really catching up. But I think Kako's using maybe a mod that actually causes him to be able to zoom out further. And by zooming out further, it's a little bit better when he moves his mouse around the screen. So it does make it a little bit easier and a little bit more watchable. And that's one of the reasons why I was like, okay, I'll do the CV replay. I mean, it is, from a damage perspective, it is a good game. However, even a game with this much crazy damage, there's actually still things to point out. And one of the first things that I've got to point out is, Kako, you've really got to do more with your fighters. I was watching this replay from beginning to end, and that was one of the things I really noticed, is that so many times your fighters were very, very passive. When you could have gone to provide vision for your team, yeah, your fighters just kind of hung around. And as you can tell in the early stages of this particular game, look at where the fighters are for Kako. They're just hanging around over his own team. When at the early stages of the game, again, not risking your fighters to AA, might have wanted to do a little bit of scouting, try to see where things are. Of course, Kako does, in a way, have a very easygoing battle because the enemy CV is really bad. This is an interesting little bit right here. It's the strafe exit strafe that you can use. So if the enemy CV decides to lock your fighter down with two fighters, what you can do is you can strafe with one and exit strafe with the other. And so you commit to one strafe with one fighter squadron and then exit with the other. And what ends up happening is that when your aircraft exits strafes, the two enemy fighters stay at the position they were at the beginning. Totally not realistic, I know. And then, of course, your fighter that you've committed to the first strafe is able to just wipe them out. Speaking of carriers, I am, like I think I've made this quite clear, I'm not a huge fan of where CVs are right now. Skill disparity is too much, and in battles like this, it's not really much fun for the enemy team. So I really am looking forward to a bit of a CV rework. Right here, enemy CV does manage to get some planes around and tries to snipe Kako. Not really a great idea since tier 9, well, any CV really above tier 8, very, very difficult to snipe as they have access to defensive fire. I would have liked to see potentially a head-on strafe there when the bombers are coming in, as they were obviously going for the attack run. Probably would have been better just to strafe them instead of trying to click them, as you have defensive fire up already. Their spread is going to be spread out already, so drop as many planes in as little time as possible. Probably a good idea. Anyways, 3 torpedo bomber squadrons already heading towards the enemy Tirpitz. Oh, this poor Tirpitz. Tirpitz does not like to see the Taiho torpedo bombers. And again, pay attention to this. This is also a very, very useful trick for CV players. If you know that the enemy ship that you're bombing is a weak AA ship, in the case the Tirpitz is, what you can do if you have, let's say, 3 torpedo bomber squadrons, to go in with 2, bomb the battleship, cause them to take flooding, which will force them to burn their damage control, and then basically time it. Look at what time your torpedoes hit and the flooding occurred, and then give it the however much time it is for the damage control party. In the case of a German battleship, it's going to take 15 seconds. So the initial drop occurred at around 15:08, I think that's when the first flooding occurred. So, roughly by probably about 14:45, that damage control is worn off. So, of course, go in with another squadron, drop those torpedoes, cause flooding, and that should be lethal for that Tirpitz, as now it's a full duration flood, and flood does a ton of damage. Alright, so continuing on into this battle, at this point in time, you can tell that there is pings on the map. The enemy team has a destroyer somewhere in that area, and his team is pinging for some kind of vision on that destroyer. Right around here, the fighters that Kako has should have already gone to go look for that destroyer. Instead, if you noticed, he's just getting those torpedo bombers up, trying to go bomb him. This should have been the time where the fighters are perma-spotting that destroyer, making that destroyer's life basically, well, it's just awful, right? You're perma-spotted, people are going to be shooting at you, all of your torpedoes are going to be spotted. That's what should have happened. I mean, this is, I think Kako, you got to work on this a little bit more. The fighter control definitely has to get better. Again, same usage of that exit strafe mechanic. And again, enemy fighter squadron got ruined. This enemy CV player is really, really not that good. Doesn't seem to know how to use strafe at all. So even playing as an air superiority Taiho, he's losing against a strike Taiho. So it's definitely, I mean, Kako's life is definitely being made easier by that CV player. If you run to like a competent CV, there's no way Kako is going to be having this kind of a match. Anyways, that destroyer got basically cross-dropped by 3 torpedo bomber squadrons, no real escape there, and dies a very, very painful death. Again, right around here, I think that particular drop could have been saved for a bigger target. Again, if you had your fighters perma-spotting that destroyer, the ships around you probably would have taken care of that destroyer, and probably would have been easier for you to just get that strike up on something bigger, potentially another big ship with a lot of HP like that Yamato that looks like he's all alone down at around, I don't know, that would be probably probably about F1, G1, somewhere there. So I think that's what you should have done, and I think that would have probably been more efficient use of resources. Still, it was a very, very good drop nonetheless, and that destroyer stood no chance at all. Once again, I mean, I do have to again point out that this is one of the major reasons why I do want to see a CV rework as well. Destroyers in the game right now, their death is vision, and CVs are the perfect vision provider, and it's not that great. I mean, destroyers, especially IJN ones, when you've got a CV in the game, they just have a tendency of ruining your day. So I really, really do hope that eventually some kind of CV rework happens where a lot of these issues end up getting addressed, and we'll have to see. But I am hoping, I'm really, really hoping that something will come out of that proper rework, and eventually CVs will fit in the game quite nicely. Alright, so aside from that though, the only other thing I noticed, and this is a bit of a sort of a side thing, is there's basically 2 battles going on. You'll see this. There's basically 2 battles going on. The actual ship-on-ship battle and the battle that goes on in chat. There is some very, very interesting chat that's happening in this battle. Anyways, okay, so Kako once again has another strike wave heading. This time I think the strike wave is heading towards this Yamato, I think. Yes, it is. Okay, so once again, against an isolated target like the Yamato, especially Yamato, who isn't the world's best ship at anti-aircraft, the same tactic will once again apply. Try to go in with, let's say, torpedo bombers first, try to get flooding first, and then what you do afterwards, once the flooding has been accomplished, is to go in and basically use a combination of flooding and fire to ruin the Yamato's day, right? And you're able to do that. So there we go, there is the flooding, which means the Yamato will burn damage control. This happens around 10-15-ish. So give it about 10 seconds. IJN damage control is relatively short. So around probably 10:05, this is right here, about the time where the damage control would have worn off. So right around here, with the extra torpedo bomber squadron still available and 2 dive bomber squadrons, that Yamato can be lethal with a combination of, let's say, 2 fires and a flood. And so Kako right here really has to execute this drop properly. But it's not the kind of drop I think I would have done. I mean, I think I would have prioritized the torpedo bombers to get that flooding in first, and then coming in with the 2 dive bomber squadrons to try to get maximum amount of fire possible. Kako does manage to get 2 fires, which, is able to do quite a bit of damage. There's the Witherer medal right there, but the torpedo bomber really, the extra squadron that he had kept, didn't do anything. Basically got shot down for nothing, and not really worth it considering that Yamato's damage control was down. And I mean, the enemy CV really is making life very, very easy for Kako, not strafing, not doing anything, 3 fighters on 2 fighters and losing those engagements. The enemy CV was, yeah, not very good at all. It really made life very, very easy. Speaking of dive bomber drops, there's actually a way to do a dive bomber drop on a big battleship like a Yamato where you can actually aim for maximum fires. And what you do is you actually stack your dive bombers, right? So you stack, let's say squadrons 6 and 7 in this case, right? So you stack them together and you command them to drop on one point. And so what you do is it does require a little bit of faster finger clicking actions. So what you do is you group the squadrons, you commit to a drop on the same point, and as soon as you finished committing the 2 squadrons to one drop point, and before the circle turns yellow, so where the drop gets engaged, you deselect one of the squadrons, right? And you select just only the other squadrons. So let's say you select squadron 7, and then what you do is you retarget its drop so it's a little bit further back. And what you can do at times, if you do this correctly, is on one drop with 2 dive bombers, you can get 3 or 4 fires. And I've done this before, and it's very, very lethal, because you basically have a battleship burn their damage control, and boom, they get hit with like 3 or 4 fires, and that is a terrifying amount of damage. Okay, so Kako once again gets his 3 torpedo bomber squadrons up, and there's a rune over here, which is a ship that Kako can kill off in one attack run. However, I'm not sure if he noticed that the Montana had taken a destroyer torpedo and had flooded. And I wonder if at this time the better target would have been to bomb that Montana, right? One of the major reasons is you remove a major anti-air threat. And if the Montana takes flooding and fires, that is a major anti-air threat gone. Because if you look at all the other ships on the enemy team, Montana is really the only one that is an air threat. Everybody else is, well, vulnerable. The Monarch is vulnerable, right? The Yamato is vulnerable. So I almost wonder if it would have been better here to just take out the Montana first, and then with the Montana out of the way, everything else becomes easier to strike. That's debatable, but it is something that I wonder. Also, again, right here, dive bombers going after the Monarch. Again, I'm wondering really if Kako just missed that Montana taking that torpedo, because if he did, this would explain why he decides to go for an easier target like the Monarch, right? Had he noticed, I mean, the Montana would have been the get rid of as quick as possible target in a situation like this, just so that you can remove a pressure threat, because the Montana is the one pushing up, and also you can remove that anti-air threat when you still have some reserve aircraft left. Later on, things are going to be quite a bit more challenging. Anyways, at this particular point in time, I mean, we are talking a ton of damage already, 258,000 damage and climbing. But again, with most CV games, if there's a disparity in skill between the 2 CV players, you can see some pretty outlandish results in terms of what a CV is able to pull off. And again, like I mentioned before, I really do hope that one day when we do get that CV rework, that it'll still be like skilled players will have obviously that skill pay off for them, but at the same time should make it where more average players will find it easier to pick up and get into. Because in the current game right now, it is very much where an elite CV player will dominate, not just the average CV player, but it'll dominate their team as well. So hopefully, right? Hopefully we'll see that kind of change. Again, this year we didn't really get that particular rework. Monarch goes down quite easily to a cross drop, and so yeah, the situation is not looking all that great. I mean, there's a Shima here, there's a St. Louis, there is Yamato, there is Montana on the enemy team left, and Kako really is the only one left on his team. His Shima is really low HP, and the NC is AFK. I don't understand why the Shima decided to smoke and stop. I mean, it's one torpedo bomber squadron. There's really no need to do that. You could have just kept going, maneuver, turn into that torpedo bomber squadron, and everything would have been fine. Not sure what that Shima player decided to do there, and yeah, got wrecked. And of course, that also gives Kako Kraken Unleashed for 5 kills. Alright, now Kako decides to go after the Montana. And see, this is, in my opinion, this is a little bit on the late side. Had he done it earlier, that Montana would have been just, well, would have been dead. But right now, Montana is providing a lot more of a threat. And it's starting to get into that range where if the Montana just keeps coming a little bit more, his AA could start to really mess with Kako's planes. Just, you know, as they're coming off the deck, planes are starting to get shot at. And potentially planes are getting lost as soon as they get into action. But Montana does get pushed away by the Shimmer torpedoes. Is currently in a, I don't know, between some islands in that little slot there. It will make the approach for Kako a little bit easier in this kind of position, as there's not many places that Montana can maneuver to. So I think Kako's going to get off a decent drop here. Coming in with these torpedo bombers. There we go. Montana really just, yeah, as you can tell, no maneuvering room, and these torpedoes are going to hurt. But see how many planes he loses now, and at this particular stage of the game, losing this many planes, right? Had he taken out that Montana earlier, would still probably have more firepower to deal with the rest of these ships, the St. Louis and the Yamato. Really the only two remaining surface ships after that Montana, right? Had that Montana been taken out earlier, he would have been dealing right now with maybe a Runa Yamato and a St. Louis, which is not a bad proposition, right? Especially because you know you can basically one-shot a Rune. You can pretty much one-shot a St. Louis. See? So when you're playing carriers, sometimes you really do have to make these decisions. They're very split-second decisions, right? It's like, do you notice something that happens on the map and can you take advantage of it? If you can, potentially things can go your way. If you miss it, you could potentially pay for it a little bit later on. So it is something that, as a carrier player, you do have to like really keep an eye out on the map, really pay attention to things. I actually think that this particular mod is actually very, very helpful for carrier players, because it gives a bigger view of things that are happening, and it's easier to spot things happening. And I've always thought that the current carrier camera is just zoomed in a little bit too much. So yeah, maybe this is something that for those of you out there who are playing carriers and you're thinking about maybe some mods, you might want to look into this and get a slightly more expanded view. Ooh, sorry about that. Replay camera did something. Anyways, alright, so Kako's now bombing the St. Louis and the Yamato at the same time, two different squadrons here. I think he was pretty confident that the St. Louis would have died with two squadrons and the Yamato was going to take whatever damage. There is the torpedo, and it's close. Oof, nope, no luck there. Oh, no luck there at all. But again, there's only a minute left, and I think there's just too much of a points disparity now. The enemy team was able to push in a little bit aggressively, was able to block some of those cap points, and oh, this is just not enough. Shima finally decides to open up with guns. Shima didn't really have a lot of HP, so really it's desperation now. Opens up with guns, does manage to get a torpedo to kill off the St. Louis, but we're talking less than 40 seconds now. And it's just not enough. I mean, unless there's a flooding on this Yamato now, combination of, and no flooding, that's not good. I mean, we're really looking at this last squadron here. Oh, come on, let's see what happens here. Maybe a flood. If there's a flood and maybe another fire or so, maybe the Yamato will go down. 15 seconds left, 14. Oh, there's not much time left. Again, just no luck. No, didn't get that flooding. And the Yamato is just going to squeak out with a little bit of HP remaining. And with no time left, 418,410 damage, new European record for the Taiho, is not enough to secure IGN Kako the win. Anyways, folks, hope you enjoyed this bit of a wacky game. Aside from all that, take care, have yourselves a good one, and I'll see you all next time.